Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on how ArchivesSpace is being used to support the development of the Free 'em All Radio Archive, a community oral history project housed at Dominican University, and how students in the School of Library and Information Science at Dominican gain practical experience working on this project. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Lead for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by Caitlin Griffith, Adjunct Professor and Focus Project Manager at Dominican University. Also with us are ArchivesSpace Program Lead Christine DeBella and ArchivesSpace Program Assistant Bailey Grace Harrell. We're delighted to have you with us for this webinar. I was very fortunate to attend a session on the work Dominican University is doing with Free 'em All Radio while at MAC earlier this year, and I'm grateful to Caitlin for being willing to come and discuss ArchivesSpace's role in the project today. This session is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel and website soon. You will notice your microphone and camera are both muted. Please feel free to talk with fellow attendees via the chat, or if you have a question about the content of the webinar, please post those questions in the Q&A option. We'll be holding questions until the end, and I'll read those questions in the Q&A during that time. We have a fairly large number of people registered for today's webinar, representing a variety of experiences and skill sets. Keep in mind that all attendees and participants in this webinar are expected to adhere to the ArchivesSpace Code of Conduct, and all attendees should be considerate and respectful in their interactions in the Q&A and the chat. Bailey Grace just dropped a link where you can find our Code of Conduct as well as our community's core values. As I said, this webinar will discuss how ArchivesSpace is being used to support the development of the Free 'em All Radio Archive at Dominican University. Free 'em All Radio is a call-in podcast launched in 2016 by the Lady of Rage and Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. of the Black Panther Party Cubs. The show has become a living historical record, broadcasting the voices of incarcerated individuals and political activists who speak on current events, racial injustice, and prison abolition. Founded in 2021, the Free 'em All Radio Archive works to create an equitable and inclusive cultural record by preserving and providing access to this rich and ongoing dialogue. At the heart of this initiative is a classroom-based practicum in which students gain hands-on experience in community-based archiving. Through this practicum, students collaborate directly with community stakeholders while learning to describe, catalog, and provide access to born digital content using ArchivesSpace. In this session, Caitlin Griffith will offer a live demonstration of the project's ArchivesSpace repository and describe the podcast cataloging process. She'll also reflect on how relationship building among student catalogers and community partners supports both ethical archival practice and professional development. This case study will offer ArchivesSpace users a model for building community archives using open source tools and integrating archival education into real-world projects, supporting both community preservation efforts and the next generation of archival professionals. I'm very much looking forward to this, so I'll turn things over to you, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Let me share my screen. One moment. Wonderful. So yes, thank you all for joining me today. I am very excited to talk some more about Free 'em All Radio and how myself and my students have been able to use ArchivesSpace in service of this really exciting project. So as Jessica mentioned, this is a program collection built around Free 'em All Radio, which is a call-in podcast. It's a living, community-driven collection that challenges traditional approaches to documentation and shows how ArchivesSpace can be used for born digital materials. On this slide, you can see my email, which if you have any questions or you want to talk further after the presentation, you are welcome to reach me there. And this is a picture of the Hampton House, which is the childhood home of Fred Hampton, the chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. You can see that there's a mural in the foreground of him, and the project really sort of started around saving the Hampton House. So I'll get into this a little bit later, but that was the impetus that initially put me in contact with Chairman Dr. Fred Hampton Jr. So I always just I put this picture in my syllabus as well to pay proper due to the historic landmark of the Hampton House. Okay, so a little bit about Free 'em All Radio. As Jessica mentioned, it was started in 2016 as a platform for direct communication, activism, and organizing. It was founded by Chairman Dr. Fred Hampton Jr. and the Lady of Rage, who you can see depicted on the infographic on the right here. Um, Chairman is the leader of the Black Panther Party Cubs and also the Prisoners of Conscience Committee. He was a former political prisoner himself, and has been organizing in Maywood and Chicago and really internationally for the better part of the last 4 decades. Um, and the Lady of Rage is a music artist, an MC, and is very involved in women's entrepreneurship, especially around the music industry. So having them both co-host this program is um, a a real treat, I would say. For each episode that is produced, there is an infographic like this one created, which is an additional archive resource that students are finding ways to accession and process. But in addition to the date and the time that the show is live, the infographic also promotes the phone number that listeners can call in to be put on the air, and as well as the former URL that the show was hosted on. I'll talk about that a little bit more, and then also some topics that were discussed in that episode, like Lil Bobby Hutton, Lawrence Big Law logins, and this news article about the Chicago Police Department fearing revenge killings after the assassination of a Black Disciples gang member. Um, so that sort of, I think, gives a really helpful snapshot into sort of what episodes um, look like. So far, since 2016, over 460 episodes have aired, and about 214 have been archived, have been included in our digital finding aid. It's an ever-evolving record um, and is dynamic and growing every passing week. One of the things that makes Free Mall Radio so impactful and special is the call-in format. Um, I'll talk a little bit later about the preservation of podcasts and sort of resources that archivists and podcast creators can look towards um, for how to preserve. But also, there is certainly a conversation to be had about what is beneficial to the historical record. Um, there are so many podcasts, and I wouldn't go as far as saying that each one is deserving of preservation. But the fact that this is not just uh, two people with a microphone talking to each other about their opinions and thoughts, but this open call to an international community really solidifies this as a primary source, particularly for the Black community, in conversation about political and current event topics, um, and also strongly with regards to incarceration. The Black Panther Party Cubs and chairman in particular have very strong ties to prison abolition organizing. And people will frequently call in to Free Mall Radio from incarceration, from prison. In fact, the name of the podcast, Free Mall Radio, Free Mall comes like Free Mall is a bit of a slogan from chairman and the Black Panther Party Cubs, and it refers to political prisoners. And in uh, their point of view, political prisoners incorporates many, if not all, Black people incarcerated in the United States. Um, so uh, it is a podcast with a very strong point of view and one that, in following that point of view, gives the researcher and the listener access to a lot of really vital information that would otherwise be inaccessible. And ultimately, what is created is an archive by and for the people. With that background of the uh, sort of what Fremont Radio is, I want to talk a little bit about the classroom-based practicum format. So a core part of this project is the classroom-based practicum. MLIS students at Dominican University learn to process oral histories, create metadata, and collaborate directly with community members. They also visit the Hampton House. This is a picture from inside the Hampton House with one of my classes. I'm the second from the left in the back there. Um, these visits happen at the end of every semester in order for students to meet chairman and other Cubs members. The Lady of Rage is always invited, but she lives in California, so it's tricky to coordinate. And also to learn from the tour that chairman gives us of uh, the Hampton House, and also to share with chairman the progress that students have made over the course of a particular semester. Um, this sort of collaboration and this visit grounds these students' work in personal connection and accountability. If there are mistakes that students made or decisions that students made that the Cubs have pushback on or questions about or suggestions for, that feedback is taken in real time and then applied to the work of next semester's students. And that editing capacity that ArchivesSpace has is really helpful towards that end of collaboration and sort of not considering the record sacred or unchangeable, but rather as like a collaborative sort of living document. A little bit about the timeline to show how our project has grown. In the summer of 2021, I was a graduate student at Dominican University in the MLIS program, and I was getting ready to complete the practicum requirement for our degree program. Around that time, the Hampton House and the Cubs and chairman had been sort of fighting with the city of Maywood over um, the like ownership of the Hampton House and an abandoned building next to the Hampton House, which was an eyesore and had been vacant and burnt out for a very long time, which they were trying to convert into a community garden. Um, so as this sort of back and forth between the Hampton House and the city unfolded, there was a community guerrilla gardening event that the Cubs put an open call out to for people to come help plant seedlings in this vegetable garden that they were developing. And it was there that I was able to get in contact, where I was able to meet Chairman and sort of ask if he and the Cubs had any use for an archivist or an archive student. And it was his idea. He immediately pointed me towards Free Mall Radio and his desire to transcribe these episodes for text-based searching in the future, and also for another method of recording or another method of preserving these episodes. So in the fall of 2021, I began my practicum with the goal of uh, transcribing all of these episodes, not all of these episodes, but certainly some of these episodes, um, like in accordance with the wishes from Chairman and the Cubs. I pretty quickly realized that ArchivesSpace was a very fitting platform and content management system for this project, and also was fortunate to discover that Dominican University had already an ArchivesSpace account and relationship that I could contribute to. So after the completion of my practicum and my graduation, I kept in contact with supportive faculty from Dominican, and we sort of collaboratively built my practicum into a fieldwork class for graduate students to continue the work that I had started on this digital finding aid. In the spring of 2022, I taught my first class, and then at the end of the semester in April of 2023, um, was our first visit to the Hampton House. Um, Over the course of the past 3 years, the past, I think, give or take 6 semesters, those visits have continued to happen, and those updates on progress have continued to happen. And also this sort of like organic instruction between students and Cubs about ArchivesSpace and how it functions and what it can do has also continued. In February of this year, Chairman and Akuit and Jerry, Mother Comrade Akuit and Jerry, who is a Black Panther and a poet and a revolutionary in her own right, visited campus to cap off our Black History Month, and had a dialogue discussion and a screening of Judas and the Black Messiah, which really went a long way to solidify this relationship, not just between the MLIS program and the Cubs, but also between Dominican and Maywood. Dominican is in River Forest, which is a quite a wealthy suburb of Chicago. Maywood is a very historically Black, historically working class suburb. And the relationship uh, tends to be non-existent. And so this project sort of demonstrates Dominicans' commitment to being a good neighbor, and being curious about the community history that exists around and inside of it. And then in April of this year as well, we were fortunate enough to present at MAC, the Midwest Archives Conference, which is where I met Jessica and why I'm here today. I also want to shout out two of my students who presented with me at MAC, who also contributed to pieces of this presentation, Hannah Tomes and Leah Kirchhoff, who were part of my first cohort, who are wonderful professionals and very conscientious archivists. ArchivesSpace actually really helps to facilitate this proactive archiving and community access method or approach that the Free ML Radio archive has really benefited from. Um, so we approach archiving as a participatory process rather than a neutral one. Students are not passive. They help shape the collection, make decisions collaboratively, and learn what it means to be stewards of community knowledge. Every choice that students make, they learn is a decision that has impacts on the collection as a whole and has impacts on future researchers who connect with Free ML Radio through potentially this digital finding aid. Our open access model ensures that anyone can discover and use our digital finding aid through a Google search, which is also a really wonderful component of ArchivesSpace. Anything that is published by students immediately becomes visible to web researchers who may be curious about this collection. Um, I just wanted to come back to the visit from Chairman and Akuit and Jerry. There's a picture here from them on stage. Akuit and Jerry was both sick and injured that day, but she still wanted to join via Zoom to participate, which I was really touched by. And yeah, it was a really wonderful way to reinforce the idea that the community behind the project is the reason for the existence of the project and is of primary importance, rather than being disconnected from the community that created it. And this also like really plays into this ownership model as well that has sort of organically come from this approach. Dominican doesn't own the podcast episodes. It doesn't host the podcast episodes. It has no masters. The connection is the finding aid for collaborative research, because there is little to no level of description on the website that did host Free ML Radio, which has I'll talk about it in a second, but that's been complicated. There's no level of description beyond maybe the date that an episode was aired. And so providing that context as a research supplement really is the foundation of the relationship. And so sort of in this post-custodial um, way, Dominican is contributing to the access potential of this collection without demanding its ownership, um, which has really gone a long way in fostering good relationships um, between the university and the Cubs and the Maywit community. So, to do a bit of demonstration, um, I will pull up our ArchivesSpace platform and then just search up our collection level description. So you can see here that our episodes are arranged by series chronologically. And then within the series, the items appear. They are also meant to be chronological, but our students are learning and are learning the platform as well. So they will be made chronological in semesters to come. Um, Students have really benefited from the integration of DAX into ArchivesSpace. That's been really helpful. Um, Instead of, I mean, all of the students that take the practicum have taken an intro to archives class, so they're familiar with DAX and they're familiar with professional standards. But having this reference um, built in is really helpful and allows them to maintain a level of uh, independence and self-esteem, I think, as they work instead of having to pause their work and try to look up a question, or I think more frequently, send me an email with that question. So that's also very helpful. Uh, some of the, I would say, most important elements to our records are the agent links and the subject headings. So our agent links uh, originate from a mixture of places, or really either from the Library of Congress or from local sources. Because of the community-driven nature of Free Mall Radio, um, there are many agents who call in, who are featured, whose music is played in an episode, who are referenced by callers or our hosts, who don't appear in the Library of Congress, but are still very necessary to capture. And so one of the first things that we do is teach students how to um, create a uh, an agent link and a subject heading. Um, Additionally, with our subject headings, um, there's a bit of a dialectic, I suppose, between our Library of Congress subject headings and our local subject headings. Um, the definition that the Library of Congress provides for a subject heading and the way that same language might be used in an episode um, do not overlap 100%. For example, uh, Chairman and the Lady of Rage and many callers would refer to the American prison system as concentration camps, um, or refer to their time incarcerated as being in a concentration camp, which is legitimate and accurate and honest, but is not the language that the Library of Congress uses when describing American prisons, nor is it what it means when the Library of Congress subject heading is the Library of Congress subject heading of concentration camps is used to refer to a resource. So students have used the ability to add notes into subject headings that are created locally to explain, to provide context to what this subject heading means and why it's being used in this context. in this episode. So that is also a very helpful component. Additionally, students create biographical notes for our co-hosts, an abstract, and a time-stamped index to refer to the um, primary topics discussed over the course of an episode, usually between 1 and 2 hours. Um, this is also where caller information is kept so that researchers can refer to specific timestamps to hear certain callers speak. Uh, this has been an exercise of discretion for students to be able to put themselves in the shoes of a researcher and say, okay, if I were listening to this episode as a researcher, what would be relevant? Like what is mentioned in passing versus what is unpacked and examined, um, and that sort of balance between what should be included in an index versus what need not be, what may not be particularly of use to a researcher. This index has taken the place of the transcript that was initially requested by chairman. And I'll talk in a little bit about why that is. But this is the sort of level of detail that um, we're able to go into currently, um, and is one of the standard notes that are included. And then we also utilize the external documents um, feature in order to provide a permanent or theoretically permanent link to an episode.
Live on Facebook, also be on Instagram.
Episodes are live streamed from YouTube and Facebook, and many are also, depending on the year, live streamed from Instagram as well. Uh, it used to be the case that all of these episodes from 2016 on were hosted on a website called Blog Talk Radio. But that website back in March was went defunct. It's no longer accessible, and nearly a decade of podcast episodes are unfindable, which is oops, sorry, was a very difficult uh, challenge um, for this project. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. There we go. Um, and so that means that there are some external document fields that are now inaccurate, that students will need to go back and either remove or replace um, while we're in the process of locating all of the episodes that we can. There was a Black Panther Party Cubs member who was able to download the majority of episodes into external storage before the website shut down. And we're working on creating duplicate access files for students in our own external storage so that they can continue this processing work. One of the most useful tools that students have really embraced is this plugin to the Library of Congress. This is also really helpful in trying to determine, one, what exists in the Library of Congress and what doesn't, but also like what verbiage the Library of Congress uses and if it is sufficient for the purposes of the community. So we might search something like Busta Rhymes, which may be a name that I'm like, ooh, I don't know if that exists in the Library of Congress. Maybe it does. Um, it looks as though it does, which is great. And then students would select an import. That import would happen automatically. And then when completed, we'll be prompted to refresh the page. And we'll see that completed report and then also all of the new and modified records that exist as a result of this import, which is extremely helpful because before utilizing this plugin, students would manually migrate this information from the Library of Congress, which would mean that new and modified record information wouldn't really exist. So we'd be missing out on all of this metadata um, that like really helpfully supplements um, this finding aid and makes Dominican University's ArchivesSpace more robust. Alternatively, we could search a name like Leslie McSpadden, who's the mother of Mike Brown, who was assassinated in Ferguson, Missouri, in 2016. And I'm pretty sure that she does not exist in the Library of Congress. So this would indicate to a student that this is a local agent link that they would need to create. And the same thing goes with subject headings. So if we were to look at something like American political prisoners, there would be no matches, but then students could modify their search to see if there is a subject heading that is close or close and can be narrowed through modifiers, or if this is a subject heading that needs to be created locally. So something like political prisoners as artists would very much likely be relevant to an episode of Free Mall Radio. Many artists and authors who have created art while incarcerated are discussed or call in, and so now this is a subject heading that can be referenced and utilized by students. And then the ability to view the published record that a student has just created is also really wonderful and really helps students visualize how their work fits into this bigger picture, this bigger research tool. Yeah, I think this might be a Blog Talk Radio link. Yeah, so this website no longer exists, which is an ongoing project for us. Oops. Yeah, so as I sort of mentioned before, traditional subject headings, the Library of Congress subject headings don't always capture the language or meaning of our source material. In response, students have developed custom descriptors in consultation with our co-hosts and with the Cubs to ensure that terminology is culturally accurate and honors the community's right to define their own narratives. That archival autonomy becomes a very important piece of this project. I also briefly wanted to touch on transcription and indexing. The image on the right is a transcript that a student created by hand. Actually, my student Leah Kirchhoff, who I mentioned earlier, created by hand. And it took her 8 hours to complete this. This is in no small part because the audio quality of recordings, especially the ones hosted on Blog Talk Radio, was very bad. Often it was a recording of a recording. Often it was a recording of a recording where Chairman and the Lady of Rage called in on their personal cell phones. So it was very difficult to parse out word for word a transcription. Indexing takes much less time, maybe 4 hours to index a 2-hour episode. and is still helpful to the researcher. But we still want to honor the initial request for this project, which was to create transcription. And so we have begun to explore AI-assisted transcription processes, which are not perfect, and for a long time have been not helpful. But now we're beginning to turn a bit of a corner. The audio quality certainly continues to be an issue when it comes to integrating AI. But also we've discovered that AI transcription is not very good at transcribing Black American English, and does not understand Black American accents, and frequently misinterprets word usage, and that creates its own challenges. So human review remains essential, but also bringing in AI into the classroom to sort of for students to dip their toes into has been also, I think, professionally helpful. So why archive podcasts? Podcasts are very popular and durable in some ways, but also quite fragile. They are vulnerable to deletion, platform changes, and loss, as we've seen ourselves through Frame All Radio. And this collection shows how podcasts can align with institutional missions to document community memory and preserve materials often ignored by traditional archives. The barrier to entry to creating an archive is very low. And if we look at them as oral histories of sorts, and very helpful primary source material, they reveal themselves to be like much richer resources to historians and researchers. But their shelf life is quite short and delicate. On this slide, you can see a chart of podcast listenership from the Pew Research Center, which shows an ever-increasing rate of podcast listeners, like from their creation through till today. It is such a big section of media, and it's something that archivists, I think, have started to pay attention to and will continue to need to do so in the future. Some resources for podcast preservation, just in case anyone is curious or has podcasts in mind, either as individuals or as members of institutions that they would like to investigate the preservation of. So Preserve This Podcast is a great tool. It's a project created to teach independent podcasters how to safeguard their work against digital obsolescence and loss. They've developed a zine and workshops offering step-by-step guidance on preservation, including things as basic as how to name files, create metadata, how to perform backups. It's focused on especially smaller creators who often lack institutional support. And I highly recommend. Internet Archive, which I think many, if not all of us, have run into previously, is a massive digital library that archives websites, audio, video, books, and other media for long-term access. I briefly thought that I would be able to find old episodes of Frame All Radio on Blog Talk through the Internet Archive, but realized that I could find the page, but the audio recording was inaccessible because the creator or the host of that platform did not opt to save those media recordings, unfortunately. Internet Archive hosts and archives podcasts. Creators or users can upload episodes to ensure that they remain accessible. They do that for free. It provides stable URLs and metadata indexing, making it easier to cite and find podcasts over time, and also captures podcasts via the Wayback Machine, which preserves web-based feeds. And then Podcast RE is a research project at UW-Madison, building a comprehensive database of podcasts for study and discovery. More than 5 million podcast episodes exist within this project, along with links and metadata. It collects and indexes millions of podcast episodes, provides searchable metadata, and supports researchers, journalists, and historians in studying podcasts as a cultural phenomenon. So these are highly recommended tools and things that I recommend to my students as well. Beyond the technical work, this archive is a site of professional and ethical engagement. Students contribute to real world work by preserving voices of social change, learning to see community members as knowledge holders and co-curators instead of subjects of study, and making episodes and information discoverable and accessible. In terms of takeaways for ArchivesSpace users, with regards to a project like this one, especially in a classroom environment, we've learned, I think, over the course of the past 4 years that we need to design for relationships over records. The relationship between Dominican and the Cubs, Dominican and Maywood, has been really fruitful, and has provided sort of a well of potential experience for grad students to continue to return to semester after semester. Collaborating on metadata to reflect community language has also been extremely important. And that sort of also reinforces this idea of community control and also the idea of participating instead of being studied, applying your own language to yourself and your experiences, instead of having someone else describe it for you makes a big difference. Um, Adapt tools to handle dynamic content like podcasts. ArchivesSpace has been really helpful with that. But there are also some learning curves to be able to preserve audio files in particular, um, and facilitating that access through Dominican's platform um, has been a learning process. And then also embedding education in practice so that students learn by doing. As we all know, ArchivesSpace is a platform that many institutional archives utilize. And so teaching students sort of the nuts and bolts of professional standards of uh, archival description and arrangement, and also this like rather ubiquitous content management system has provided uh, like foundational helpful experience for them as they enter the job market, while also encouraging them to sort of grapple with the ethics of the work of the description, and how to perform their ethical responsibilities as archivists through the tools of the trade. That has been a really helpful um, lesson to bring into the classroom. So looking towards the future, we have been fortunate enough to receive an Illinois Humanity grant, which allowed us to make some purchases, particularly for mobile recording equipment, so that chairmen can carry around a pocket recorder, so that students will have direct recording to work from, especially when it comes to transcribing, instead of a secondhand recording. We also were able to purchase external hard drives for access copies for students, and also maybe access copies for researchers, depending on what permissions were given by the Cubs and by our co-hosts. We also have been looking into transcription software that has subscription-based tiers, for if and when we find a subscription, or for if and when we find a transcription software that is of use, we can sort of grab onto that resource and use it outside of the free trial, which is pretty limiting. And we're using this funding to also tap into community researcher training. In particular, we've been in communication with some high schools in Maywood for high school students to utilize the archive for research projects. That is still definitely in the making, but um, the beginnings of those relationships are really encouraging. All of this work and this potential growth, we hope will ensure that the archive remains dynamic and community driven. Um, and I really love this picture. This is a picture from one of my class's presentations. Actually, in the background, you can see Hannah Tomes and Leah Kirchhoff, who have uh, um, who were my co-presenters at MAC. But you can see a student presenting her progress and her process to chairman. And you can really see how engaged and interested chairman is in this work. I mean, he is a historian. His politics derive from historical materialism. This is something that is not just an intellectual exercise and is not just to make sure that his footprint exists in the historical record. This is something that the importance of which resonates with this organization, which is wonderful and uh, a really great relationship to have with a partner in the archive. Um, and with that, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you again for listening. And I'd be happy to take any questions. And also, these are the links that you can use to check out our digital finding aid on ArchivesSpace. And if you want to listen to some Freemall Radio episodes, you can refer to the second link on this slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. That was great. There was a lot to unpack there. We already have one question in the Q&A. But yeah, I'm really grateful for you for coming to present. There's a lot, like I said, when I first saw your presentation at MAC, I was kind of blown away by how much you're grappling with in this practicum. You're dealing with born digital material, specifically podcasts, and how do you manage born digital material? What do you do when you don't actually own that material? And how do you keep it accessible? Dealing with students and having students make ethical considerations, and how do you teach them that way? And there's just so much going on, dealing with new technologies like AI, and you're doing this important work and trying to make all of these decisions. So I think that this was really interesting, and I appreciate you doing that. We have a few questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to go ahead and stop talking and dive into those, though. Dean asks, could one use the Internet Archive to host storage of podcasts, but create an ArchivesSpace entry on your site to facilitate access? Is that duplicative?
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that question? I got distracted by the chat.
Okay. Could you use the Internet Archive to host or store your podcast and then create an ArchivesSpace entry on your site to facilitate access, or would that be duplicative? He's asking.
No, I think that that would be great because um, it's really just the description that lives in ArchivesSpace, and then having the repository through the Internet Archive would be a really great sort of pairing that way. And I think is definitely something to investigate with the Cubs, especially with the episodes they were able to download, if that hosting would be something that they would be interested in. I think that, and also like with our 3-2-1 rule, when it comes to backups, like three different locations, at least two different file types, and then I think, oh, I forget what the one is. But that sort of like multiple uh, pronged approach, I think is a really good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. There are more questions in the Q&A, but I have like follow-up questions for that too, because you don't actually own the material. So all you can do is guide, right? Like make
Exactly.
recommendations for where they should store their material and best practice. And and we even within an actual archival context, we haven't necessarily figured all that stuff out. So this is,
Mhm.
yeah, it's a struggle, I'm sure. Violet asked, do you have the capacity to use alternative vocabularies which might be more appropriate than Library of Congress, such as the Homosaurus or the Zine subject thesaurus?
Oh, I'm actually not familiar with those. I'm gonna write that down. Um, I think that uh sorry, I can't uh write and talk. Um, yeah, I think that the like finding standard description within this sort of uh desire to um like push back against this unhelpful, occasionally unhelpful hegemonic method of description um, also definitely presents benefits because then researchers across repositories that are united by um, this language will be able to instead of trying to test out and locate the best descriptor for a particular repository can use language across repositories. Um, it's not something that I looked into. Sort of, I think maybe a bit myopically, because we were just looking at the languages in the dropdown from ArchivesSpace, um, and also because students were uh, most recently trained in Library of Congress subject headings. But I definitely think investigating those alternative descriptive languages is a really good idea for like broader uh, broader research purposes.
Thanks. Yeah, and for anyone who's interested in that, and for you, Caitlin, Rachel Searcy did a presentation at one of our member forums, probably two member forums ago, on using alternative thesaurus. And I know that the Homosaurus was one of the resources that she talked about. So go
Mhm.
check that recording out, everyone, after you finish this webinar. All right, next question. I'm interested in the practicalities of the project. How do you have multiple students work on one ArchivesSpace record at once? And how do you quality control so there's some consistency across different students' work?
For sure. Yeah, this was a learning process. Each student works on a different series. And this is something that we've been uh, fortunate to do, or like fortunate to be able to do without running into one another, um, at least at this point. Where like a student will, at the beginning of the semester, each student picks a year to work on. Um, and the process of description is pretty, as you saw, pretty involved and sort of slow going. So students on average will process about 2 episodes per week. Um, and then at the end of each week, will send me as an assignment, as a completed assignment, the links to the ArchivesSpace episodes that they have completed processing. And since the class sizes I've had have been pretty small, about 5 students per semester, that's a rate and a number that I'm able to quality check on a weekly basis, and then sort of return feedback to students who integrate that feedback and then make those changes. So I think that it's um, a combination of the series level assignment and then the small class size and the sort of slower intentional pace that makes that possible on a rolling basis.
Thanks. Following up on that question, one thing that you talked about was how it's a call-in show. So frequently, people are calling in and probably talking about their personal like experiences or what they're experiencing while they're in prison, and not necessarily thinking about this is going to be available in perpetuity. I may be talking about things that I don't really necessarily want shared. How do students grapple with like how much information to share and like rights management around that sort of thing?
Yeah, this was actually a question that we brought back to Chairman and the Lady of Rage to ask them, do you do you think that your callers from previous episodes now I think that callers while they're waiting to be put on the air, like as part of the prep conversation that the um like switchboard operator, for lack of a better term, does, like includes this project. But in terms of previous episodes, we sort of asked them, do you think that folks would be comfortable being identified by name in the index? Do you think that they would be comfortable being tagged? And we sort of sought their insight. And where they landed is that, these episodes have always been available online in perpetuity since the first broadcast. And that's actually, in fact, how many callers found the episodes in the first place, was through Facebook live streams. So the advice that we received is that these callers at least know that the live stream exists forever, or the live stream exists on social media for as long as that social media page exists. And so then matching that level of disclosure was a safe option. But callers are not, they're not listed as agent files or agent links, unless they're there to like promote like a book that they wrote, or music they released, or like community center that is opening, something that like clearly is for like public engagement and knowledge. But yeah, deferring to our co-hosts on like their understanding of the callers, the callers' understanding, I suppose, for previous episodes.
Thanks. Yeah. Again, one of those balancing acts you have to navigate with
Mhm.
community archiving. It's very interesting. We do have one last question in the Q&A. It is the top of the hour, but it's a good question, and it's one that I can answer really fast. So we're going to do that.
Okay.
Susanna says that they're just now starting out with their ArchivesSpace setup and learning a lot about processes. So her question is, how did you access or implement the Library of Congress subject heading plugin? So Susanna, the quick and easy answer, and it's a good answer, that is the one plugin that comes out of the box with your ArchivesSpace installation. So just like Caitlin showed us in the demo, you can access that plugin the same way by going through that gear menu, and it should be there. So that is the one plugin that is available to you when you install your ArchivesSpace implementation. All right. And we're caught up and we're at the hour. But I thank you everyone, all of you that stuck with us through the end. And thank you so much, Caitlin. This was really interesting. And thank you for being willing to come and talk about this right on the tail end of talking about it at MAC. So I really appreciate you being willing to do that. This is really interesting. I think that it's going to spur a lot of conversations around lots of different topics, including using ArchivesSpace in the classroom, working with podcasts, working with communities. I think that this was really interesting, and it's a great example of what you can do with something like ArchivesSpace, and it makes me feel really good to know that in a tiny, tiny little way, I'm a part of it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And just in looking at the chat, a question that we weren't able to get to about sort of who decides and what language is permitted to describe what. I like that. I think is such an important conversation to be having, especially when it comes to reliability of repositories, because there are many repositories that are not considered reliable by particular groups of people because of the erasure of the language applied. So it's an ethical consideration that archivists need to continue to investigate.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for answering that. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and wrap up here, though. More thanks everybody. And the recording of this, as well as the slides, will be made available on our website soon. But in the meantime, you can always reach out via our listservs, and I look forward to seeing all of you at the next ArchivesSpace event. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.